What if I told you the entire war on saturated fat was built on cherry picked data? Ancel Keys threw out evidence from 16 countries, and medicine never recovered. Let me show you the data they don't want you to see. Hi everyone, my name's Marc Bates. I'm a metabolic health coach, and this is one of my roasting sacred cows in nutrition shows. The cholesterol lie that hijacked medicine for 50 years. Let's get to it. When I first encountered the revelation that Ancel Keys excluded data from 16 countries that contradicted his saturated fat hypotheses, it felt like discovering a cover up that shaped 50 years of medical practice. This wasn't just sloppy science, it was the foundation of everything wrong with how we treat metabolic disease today. Keys had data from 22 countries available, yet only used 6, and then later 7, for his famous analysis linking dietary fat to heart disease. When Yerushalmi and Hilbo plotted all 22 countries in 1957, the apparent correlation between saturated fat intake and heart disease mortality largely vanished. The data became a random scatter rather than a clear trend. My immediate reaction was a mixture of disbelief and anger, not just at the methodological flaw, but at the decades-long consequences that followed. So there's an ideological storm that buried the truth. Key's selective analysis didn't survive because it was good science. It survived because it fit perfectly with three powerful ideological forces of the 1950s and 60s. Post-war moral crusade against fat. After World War II, heart disease became America's leading killer. The public desperately needed a villain, and Keys offered one: animal fat. Fat, particularly from red meat and butter, was painted as luxury food, indulgent and gluttonous. Reducing fat intake fit neatly into a narrative of post-war austerity and moral restraint. Health advice aligned with social virtue. Religious vegetarian ideology in medicine. The roots of modern dietetics trace back to 19th century Seventh-day Adventist theology. Ellen G. White's visions declared meat eating a stimulant on par with alcohol and tobacco. Her followers founded early nutrition institutions that directly trained dietitians and influenced medical curricula. By the mid-20th century, this anti-meat, plant-based ethos was already institutionalized. When Keys presented data blaming saturated fat, it harmonized with this long-standing quasi-religious narrative that animal foods were inherently harmful. Industrial and economic forces. The 50s and 60s were the golden era of processed food expansion. Margarine producers needed scientific cover to displace butter. Cereal companies wanted to dominate breakfast tables with heart-healthy grains. Key's hypothesis gave them exactly what they needed. But this left a metabolic wreckage. Okay? When I work with patients today who've been following conventional, low-fat, high-carbohydrate guidelines for decades, I can see the fingerprints of Key's hypothesis all over their labs. The cascade of metabolic derangements is remarkably consistent. Chronic hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance, replacing natural fats with high glycemic carbs, leads to repeated large insulin surges. Without adequate dietary fat to slow absorption, glucose floods the bloodstream. Over time, tissues downregulate insulin receptors, fat oxidation gets suppressed. I see fasting insulin levels 2 to 3 times the normal range, even when fasting glucose looks okay. These patients face a double whammy energy crisis. Cells can't efficiently oxidize fat due to insulin dominance, but glucose flux is unstable due to impaired insulin sensitivity. Hypertriglyceridemia and low HDL. Excess carbohydrate intake drives de novo lipogenesis. The liver converts glucose into fatty acids and packages them into triglyceride-rich VLDL particles. These particles flood circulation with HDL production gets suppressed. Okay? I regularly see triglycerides above 200 milligrams a deciliter and HDL levels below 40 milligrams a deciliter. The LDL particle count skews towards small, dense, hyperatherogenic subtypes. Fatty liver and visceral adiposity. Decades of carb overfeeding plus seed oils drive non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Insulin traps fat in the liver and uh, visceral depot while preventing lipolysis elsewhere. Patients present with elevated liver enzymes. Ultrasound confirmed fatty liver and waist to hip ratios above 1.0, despite not being obese on BMI charts. The particle truth standard testing misses. Standard lipid panels measure cholesterol content in plasma, not particle number, size, or oxidation status. Yet it's the behavior of lipoprotein particles that determines atherosclerotic risk. While I transition someone from a high carbohydrate, low fat diet to a properly formulated ketogenic approach, the entire lipid transport system remodels. In the high carb state, excess dietary glucose drives de novo lipogenesis in the liver. The liver converts glucose to fatty acids and packages them into large triglyceride-rich VLDL particles. Chronically elevated insulin suppresses lipolysis in adipose tissue. This favors triglyceride-rich lipoproteins and small, dense LDL formation, which is bad. Small, dense LDL particles have longer residence time in plasma, greater susceptibility to oxidation, and easier arterial wall penetrations. Individuals with abundant small LDL have 300% more heart disease risk than people with large LDL, large fluffy LDLs. After transitioning to high fat, low carb, insulin drops, allowing adipose tissue lipolysis. Free fatty acids get released and used directly for energy or ketone production. Lower insulin reduces hepatic de novo lipogenesis, drastically cutting VLDL overproduction. With fewer excess triglycerides, VLDL particles become fewer, smaller, and cholesterol enriched rather than triglyceride rich. Less triglyceride transfer to LDL means less formation of small, dense LDL particles. These LDL particles that remain tend to be larger, buoyant, and more cholesterol rich. They have shorter plasma residence time, less likelihood of oxidative modification, and reduced arterial wall penetration. All of these are good. Then there's the blood work transformation. With triglycerides decreased 33% in normal weight men and 59% in overweight subjects following a ketogenic diet, HDL increases while the triglyceride HDL ratio normalizes, and this is very good. LDL-C may stay the same, rise slightly, or even increase because each LDL particle now carries more cholesterol per particle. To a conventional doctor, the LDL-C rise appears alarming, even though particle number and atherogenic potential have improved dramatically. So just gotta know what you're actually watching here. There's an institutional wall of resistance as well. When I present particle level evidence to colleagues, the pushback is fierce, not because the science is lacking, but because it collides with decades of institutional dogma and entrenched financial interests. Medical training inertia. Cardiologists and internists are still taught a simplified cholesterol theory from the Keys era. LDL cholesterol is causal, lower is always better. But particle biology, insulin resistance, and lipoprotein remodeling on low-carb diets barely get mentioned in medical curricula. Liability fears. This is a big one. Physicians worry that deviating from guideline-based statin prescribing exposes them to malpractice risk if a patient later has a cardiac event. A doctor can be sued for not prescribing a statin to a high LDL patient. They will never face legal action for prescribing one unnecessarily. There's the publication bias as well. Data showing dramatic improvements in triglyceride to HDL ratios and reduction in small dense LDL particles often get framed negatively in peer-reviewed journals if LDL-C goes up even slightly. The headlines will read things like low-carb diets raise LDL cholesterol. The reality shows ApoB unchanged or reduced, LDL particle size improved, and inflammatory markers dropped, which are all good. But they ignore the good and only highlight the headline that shocks and is wrong. Pharmaceutical economics. Statins represent a 15 to 20 billion-dollar annual market globally. Large parts of medical infrastructure are tied to cholesterol screening and statin-based risk management. Follow the money, right? A shift to treating metabolic syndrome at its root would massively shrink the long-term pool of cholesterol patients. Okay, here's a case that changed everything. One patient crystallized for me just how fundamentally wrong our current approach has been. We'll call him Tom. He was a 62-year-old man who followed the AHA's recommended heart-healthy diet perfectly. Oatmeal with skim milk for breakfast, turkey sandwiches on whole wheat for lunch, skinless chicken breast with brown rice for dinner. He had type 2 diabetes for 12 years, took metformin, basal insulin, and a statin. His blood pressure required 2 medications. He walked 30 minutes daily and did everything he was told. His lab showed the classic metabolic signature of Keys-era dietary dogma. He had an HbA1c of 8.1% despite medications, triglycerides at 280 milligrams a deciliter, HDL at 32 milligrams a deciliter, and fasting insulin at 32. Right? His advanced testing revealed pattern B lipoproteins and mostly small, dense LDL particles and high ApoB. This man was the poster child for adherence to the low-fat, high-carb, drug-centered paradigm. He did everything right, according to what his doctor told him, and was still on a conveyor belt to a dialysis, amputation, or a heart attack. The intervention. I shifted him to a carnivore-leaning, ketogenic approach, 70 to 80% of energy from fat, primarily beef, tallow, fatty ruminant meats, and eggs. Carbohydrates under 20 grams daily. The transformation over 6 months, HbA1c dropped from 8.1% to 5.4%, which is wonderful. He was off all insulin by month 3. Triglycerides fell from 280 to 72 milligrams a deciliter, and HDL rose from 32 to 52 milligrams a deciliter. LDL-C rose modestly to 130, triggering his old doctor's statin panic, but LDL particle count dropped by 30%, right? And particle size shifted to large, buoyant, pattern A, and ApoB normalized despite higher LDL-C. All of this was absolutely great. Fasting insulin fell to 6, fatty liver resolved on ultrasound, blood pressure normalized without medication. He lost 38 pounds, primarily visceral fat. That's the fat around his organs inside that you don't even see around your gut, which is the deadly type of fat. Blood pressure normalized without medication, right? All this stuff happened. After he lost 38 pounds, right? And his energy levels soared. Joint pain and neuropathy symptoms improved dramatically. He later told me, I thought I was destined for a slow, miserable decline. Now I feel like I got 20 years of my life back. Okay? The breaking point is approaching. The cholesterol-centric model won't collapse from a single study. Paradigm shifts of this magnitude happen when evidence, economics, and public pressure converge so forcibly that institutions can no longer ignore the contradiction between dogma and outcomes. Patient outcomes that can't be ignored. Programs like Virta Health have published data showing ketogenic interventions can reverse type 2 diabetes in over 50% of patients at 2 years. They normalize triglycerides, ApoB, and particle size despite higher LDL-C. As these results become mainstream, the contrast with decades of managed don't reverse guidelines will become impossible to dismiss. Economic pressure from unsustainable healthcare costs. Diabetes and metabolic syndrome is already consuming roughly 75% of U.S. healthcare dollars. 75%, right? In other countries around the world, it's even higher. When payers realize that dietary interventions reduce cardiovascular events without lifetime statin dependency and cut billions from diabetes medication costs, they'll start reimbursing metabolic therapies over pharmaceuticals. Generational change in medical training. Many younger doctors are experimenting with low-carb approaches personally. Medical students today have access to research that bypasses institutional filters. As they see metabolic therapies outperform drug-based care in practice, they'll eventually dominate guideline committees. Technological disruption of diagnostics. As advanced lipid panels and metabolic markers become inexpensive and widely available, patients will have tools to show they're metabolically healthy despite a high LDL-C. This undermines the LDC statin reflex, making it visibly obsolete to anyone who can read their own data. Okay? We're going to be talking about rebuilding medicine from the ground up now. If I could redesign medical education and clinical practice from the ground up, 3 critical changes would prevent future patients from suffering through decades of ineffective treatment. Make metabolic literacy the foundation of medical training. Medical schools spend fewer than 20 hours on nutrition in 4 years, most of it regurgitating outdated law-fat dogma. Every doctor should be fluent in insulin physiology, mitochondrial health, and toxicology of seed oils and refined carbs. They should understand chronic hyperinsulinemia as the root cause of diabetes, obesity, fatty liver, hypertension, and more. They need to replace LDL-C obsession with true metabolic markers. Standard lipid panels and fasting glucose readings are late-stage indicators. They miss decades of silent metabolic damage. Routine labs should include fasting insulin, HOMA-IR for early hyperinsulinemia detection, triglyceride to HDL ratio, and ApoB-LDLP particle count for atherogenic risk, and postprandial glucose response to expose real-life glycemic excursions. Make therapeutic carbohydrate restriction the first-line medication. The default protocol should prioritize structured ketogenic programs and metabolic health coaching as frontline therapy for all insulin-resistant states. Clinical goals should shift from keep disease numbers in range with pills to reverse disease and de-prescribe medications. Medicine would move from reactive pharmacology to proactive metabolic restoration. Doctors would become metabolic architects instead of prescription managers. The solution was always there. Remove the toxic carbohydrate load, eat nutrient-dense animal foods, let insulin drop, let mitochondria switch back to fat as a primary fuel. 50 years after Keys buried those 16 countries of data, we're finally ready to acknowledge what the evidence showed all along. So, thank you all for being with me. This was a longer video than normal. Once again, if you have any comments or questions, put them in the appropriate section. This is a community we're building. We're here to answer your questions. If there's something you want me to cover that we haven't done so, or you have an idea for a series of video you'd like me to work on, let me know. I'm always looking for great ideas I can add to you. I want to give you what you're looking for. And as always, if you haven't done so, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel a great deal, and you'll be helping a lot of other people. Thank you very much.